Hello, and thanks for stopping by. As a youngster, I, like many who grew up in the capital suburbs, was absolutely obsessed with the London Underground, and I still am of course. You can probably imagine my excitement then at the recent opening of the Elizabeth line, the brand new high-frequency, high-capacity system which has been years in the making.
As for any information, this station is now served by the Elizabeth line. Visit CFL.
Branches over existing track towards Reading in the west and Shenfield in the east have been running for several years under the guise of TfL Rail. And the core section, which opened between Paddington and Abbey Wood on the 24th of May 2022, is the final piece of the puzzle, although you will have to wait until the autumn if you want to travel the entire length without changing trains at Paddington or Liverpool Street. Having been mostly forged deep beneath the crowded streets of London, the core section of the Elizabeth line really is an incredible feat of engineering, and the 10 new stations which serve it, all of which are huge, are architecturally stunning. So then, with this long anticipated section now up and running, I think a celebration is in order, and what's better way to do that than by embarking upon an Elizabeth line pub crawl. In this special video, I'll be taking you through the core of the Elizabeth line from Paddington to Abbey Wood and showing you around each of the 10 new stations. Then, for each stop, we'll head above ground and pop into a pub, which as well as being good fun, will I hope display the breadth of the line and the wide variety of areas it serves. Just before we begin, a quick note on terminology. When it was being built, the project was known as Crossrail, and indeed many people still do refer to it as such. However, as the Elizabeth line is now the official title, that's the name I'll be sticking with in this video. It's just simpler that way. And whilst we're on technicalities, it's also worth noting that, although it's on the underground map and does indeed run deep below ground, the Elizabeth line isn't a tube line in the traditional London Underground sense. It's essentially a system in its own right. Lastly, I'd like to dedicate this video to all of those who worked on the design and construction of this modern marvel. You really have done an incredible job. Right, we've got a lot of exploring to do, so let's get cracking. And as a disclaimer, I really should say, please remember to drink responsibly. We begin our journey at the western end of the Elizabeth line's core, Paddington Station. It's early morning here. As you can see, the Knights Riviera sleeper train from Penzance has only just pulled into platform 1. The Elizabeth line was finally open to passengers less than an hour ago at 6:30 AM, and from platform 1 at Paddington, the entrance to the new line is just moments away on Eastbourne Terrace. From here, it's possible to peer into the Elizabeth line's smart cavernous depths, and as you can see, this design ensures the station is well lit by natural light. Overhead meanwhile is a vast glass canopy upon which are etched a series of clouds. Titled the Cloud Index, this was created by the American artist Spencer Finch, and the appearance of the clouds changes depending on the direction of light and time of day. At 120 metres long and spread over 180 panels, it is now one of London's largest public artworks. As the terminal where many people heading from Heathrow Airport will eventually arrive, the Elizabeth line's Paddington Station has been dubbed a new gateway for London, and it really does live up to this title. Rather fittingly, the station is built in accordance with Isambard Kingdom Brunel's 10-foot grid pattern, Brunel of course being the genius who originally designed the main Paddington terminal in the 19th century. I wonder what he would have made of this addition to his masterpiece. Another practical connection with the past is this corridor which links the Elizabeth line to the Bakerloo line, which opened at Paddington way back in 1913, nearly 110 years before the latest addition to London's transport network.
Approaching is for Abbey Wood via Canary Wharf.
Okay, as early as it is, let's go and find our first pub. There are quite a few pubs around Paddington Station, the most famous being the Pride of Paddington, which dates from the 1920s, and close to which you can see this unusual animated clock. Well, I think it's animated anyway. For today though, I've opted for the Dickens Tavern, which is located on the rather aptly named London Street, close to Norfolk Square. This pub started life in 1861, and inside you'll find a good selection of vintage photos and posters related to Paddington Station, such as this trio, which references Agatha Christie's The 450 from Paddington, The Hound of the Baskervilles, which is referenced here because Holmes and Watson depart for Devon from Paddington, and naturally, Paddington Bear. The Dickens Tavern is said to be the longest pub in London, and although it does indeed stretch for some distance, I'm not entirely sure if this is still the case. Can you think of a good contender? If so, please be sure to let me know in the comments. We'll be seeing more Dickens related bits and pieces later, by the way. This is Bond Street, but as you can see, we're not stopping here as it's the only station on the Elizabeth line that's not yet open to the public. I guess they've got a few teething problems. The trains roll slowly through here, offering a tantalising glimpse of what's to come, before accelerating back into the tunnel. Although Bond Street Station is closed, I don't think we should leave it out to our pub crawl, do you? So let's head back and see what we can find. Just around the corner from Bond Street Station, you'll find the Running Horse, which, with the history dating back to 1738, makes it the oldest pub in Mayfair. Although Mayfair is now one of London's most exclusive areas, this wasn't exactly the case when the Running Horse opened in the 1700s. You see, when Davis Street, the road upon which the pub stands, was first laid out in the 1720s, it was hoped that good class houses would be built along it. However, the streets quickly became populated with stables, breweries and tallow melting workshops, all of which no doubt lent the area a rather unpleasant stench. The Running Horse as it stands today is the result of a rebuild carried out in 1839. No doubt plenty of people will flock here for a pint when the Elizabeth Line station finally opens. When I stepped off the train for my first glimpse at the Elizabeth Line's Tottenham Court Road station, two things struck me. The first was just how huge it was. It takes several minutes to walk the length of the platform. Second was the striking design. To me it looks like something from the mind of Stanley Kubrick, a mashup say between the Grover Milk Bar from A Clockwork Orange and the spaceship Discovery 1 from 2001 A Space Odyssey. But maybe that's just me. As we'll soon see, the next few platforms along the line are designed in a similar manner. The escalators and ticketing hall, however, like all the other stations, have their own unique look, and at Tottenham Court Road, the character is a dark and brooding one. It's almost like being inside a cinema. It's been stated that this design was chosen to reflect the surrounding area's nighttime economy. After all, the entrance on Dean Street plonks you firmly in the heart of Soho. The station's interior also pays homage to 1960s brutalist architecture, which is clearly a nod to the nearby Centrepoint Tower. It's worth noting too, just how far apart the entrances on Dean Street and the Tottenham Court Road junction are. It really gives you a scale as to just how big things are down there. Anyway, with all that walking, I think we've earned a drink. The Flying Horse is the obvious choice for this one, as the pub is located directly opposite the station's Oxford Street entrance. I also have a bit of a soft spot for this place, as it was here, many years ago now, that my dad bought me my first legal pint once I turned 18. Back then, the pub was called the Tottenham, a name which it went by for many years, having adopted it in 1894. The Flying Horse, which it's since reverted to, was its original name though. Although there are plenty of pubs dotted around the area, the Flying Horse is, believe it or not, the only tavern to be located directly on Oxford Street. I guess the rest of the space is needed for clothes shops after all. At one time though, there were some 34 pubs on Oxford Street. Now that would be some pub crawl. The Flying Horse dates back to the 1790s, and the current building features some rather splendid interior design, including this stained glass atrium, these vintage ceramic tiles, and a number of figures painted on the ceiling. A further 3 paintings can be viewed on the wall, which were created by Félix de Jong, a Belgian artist best known for his decorative work in a number of late 19th and early 20th century music halls. Just like the 24th of May 2022, the day on which the Elizabeth line was seen today open to the public, the 10th of January 1863 is another important date in the history of London's transport, for it was on that cold day, all those years ago, that the Metropolitan Railway, the world's very first underground line, began operating between Paddington and Farringdon. Paddington, as we've already seen, is on the Elizabeth line, so it's rather appropriate then that Farringdon is too. What an incredible history this station has. The main feature at Farringdon Station is this artwork entitled Avalanche, which was created by Simon Perrotin and shows a collection of precious stones tumbling down the escalators. These gems were a reference to London's jewellery quarter, Hatton Garden, which is located nearby. Farringdon's Elizabeth line station also offers a seamless connection with the extensive Thameslink service. You'll hear its trains rumbling through the station as you come up the escalator. Originally known as the Butcher's Arms, this pub, now the Betsey Trotwood, opened in 1865, with the developers taking the bold decision to build it directly over the tracks of the Metropolitan Railway, which, as mentioned earlier, had started operating just 2 years previously in 1863. In those early days, the underground trains were hauled by steam locomotives. I wonder how much of their smoke puffed up into the pub. The pub's current name is a reference to the character Betsey Trotwood, who appears in Charles Dickens' 1849 novel David Copperfield as the title character's great aunt. Dickens has a good many links in this area. The most famous London home in which he lived, for example, 48 Doughty Street, is a 10-minute walk away, and the area directly around the pub features heavily in Oliver Twist. It's on Clerkenwell Green, for instance, that Oliver watches in horror as the Artful Dodger picks Mr. Brownlow's pocket. Whilst to the west is Saffron Hill, where you'll find another pub called the One Ton, which was the inspiration for the novel's Three Cripples Tavern, Bill Sykes' local. I covered the history of the One Ton in an earlier video, which I'll link above and below. With its quirky interior, the Betsey Trotwood really is a lovely pub, and despite its relatively small size, it's now a popular venue for comedy and live music. And naturally, being located above the underground, you'll frequently feel and hear the rumble of the trains below. During construction of the Elizabeth line here at Liverpool Street, a mass grave was unearthed, which was found to contain around 3,000 skeletons. Probably not the best thing to think of when you're underground. This burial site once belonged to the dreaded Bedlam Asylum, and corpses were stashed there between the mid-15th and early 18th centuries. After being painstakingly removed by archaeologists, the remains of these unfortunate souls were reburied at a site in Essex. The Blomfield Street entrance to the Elizabeth line also happens to lie in front of the spot once occupied by the old Broad Street railway terminal, which was demolished in 1986. So it's nice to see trains back here again, albeit deeper below ground. There are some really interesting features to discover at Liverpool Street. These sharp lines above the escalators, for example, are intended to emulate pinstripes, this being a reference to the suits traditionally worn by city businessmen. Also alongside the escalators is this impressive incline lift, which enables step-free access. There's also this striking blue City of London crest, and back down below, this long line of totem-like poles. These posts can be seen at Farringdon too, but at Liverpool Street there are many more, and the way in which they stretch into the distance is particularly impressive. The posts are a modern twist on the Underground's traditional uplighters, which can be spotted at tube stations such as Earls Court and St John's Wood, and they also contain speakers for announcements. I wonder if the design was inspired by this now long lost signpost, which once stood outside Manor House Station. The totems stand to attention in a long subterranean corridor, it's 175 metres long, which leads all the way to Moorgate. So yes, it's now possible to walk underground between Liverpool Street and Moorgate. I think it's fair to say then that at this stop you get 2 stations for the price of 1. Okay, let's head back towards Bishopsgate and we'll find a pub. Standing on the corner of Bishopsgate and Middlesex Street, opposite Dirty Dick's, which is another pub that's also been featured on this channel, the Woodin Shades was established in the 1860s, and the current red brick building dates from 1893. For many years, when the nearby markets at Spitalfields and Petticoats Lane were at their height, the Woodin Shades was a popular watering hole for the raucous market traders. I imagine things used to get a bit rowdy in here. The pub is still a popular spot for local workers, and being so close to Liverpool Street Station, it makes an interesting place to watch the world go by. As for the pub's rather unusual name, well, that's a nod to William Woodin, a wine merchant who once lived in the area, whilst Shades is an old slang term for a drinking establishment. As we head to the next station, I should really take a moment to talk about the rolling stock which served the Elizabeth line, the Class 345s. Built in Derby by Bombardier, the Class 345s were introduced in June 2017 when they began running between Liverpool Street and Shenfield, and by the end of 2019 they are also serving the line between Paddington and Reading. I think these trains are wonderful. They're incredibly long and boast a lot of space, so much so that they can carry up to 1,500 people. And 1 or 2 big dogs as well. This capacity is aided by the fact that you can walk seamlessly along their entire length. The Class 345s feel very fast, and the ride is so smooth you'll think you've been rolled along a billiard table. As well as this, they're also very quiet, although they do give a low, satisfying rumble as they speed through the tunnels. The Whitechapel Road entrance to Whitechapel Station is one of the Elizabeth line's most traditional looking buildings, as it's been incorporated into this smartly refurbished original underground entrance. As shown in these photographs, which can be viewed inside the ticket hall, incorporating the Elizabeth line into Whitechapel Station was a complicated process, as it was required to squeeze in amongst the District, Hammersmith and City and London Overground lines. And to confuse matters further, Whitechapel is the only station where the London Overground runs beneath the London Underground. Therefore, to provide access to the Elizabeth line, a long bridge has been built over the tracks and platforms within the station. This structure is especially impressive when viewed from the London Overground platforms. Although I wasn't able to catch a recording, I was intrigued by the station announcements at Whitechapel, which are preceded by a gong-like noise not heard anywhere else on the system. This sound is clearly a reference to the former Whitechapel Bell Foundry, the historic local workshop which crafted both Big Ben and America's Liberty Bell. If you visited Whitechapel Station recently, have you noticed this noise too? If so, please be sure to let me know in the comments. In Whitechapel, the most obvious pick for an historic boozer would have to be the Blind Beggar. Having said that though, there's a lot to say about this pub, so I'm going to save it for another video. Speaking of future videos, if you're enjoying this one but haven't yet subscribed to the channel, it'd be wonderful if you could please consider doing so, as this, along with ringing the bell icon, will ensure that you don't miss out on any future content. Plus of course it'd be great to have you along. So the Whitechapel pub I've chosen for our Elizabeth line crawl is an often overlooked gem, the Good Samaritan, which you'll find on Turner Street, nestled amongst the many buildings which make up the Royal London Hospital. This pub has always fascinated me because, well, it's not often you find a hospital which essentially has its own pub, is it? Especially one which even has a doctor on its sign. In all seriousness though, the Good Samaritan has provided a place of great comfort over the years, both for overwhelmed medical staff and families coping with illness and the death of loved ones. On a lighter note, it's also popular with students who've just passed their medical exams. I imagine things get rather messy in those cases. The Good Samaritan as it stands today was built in 1937. I especially like the stained glass and chunky fireplace. And in keeping in line with that era, this gorgeous block of Art Deco flats, known as Gwyn House, which dates from 1938, can be found next door. In 2016, plans were unveiled to, no prizes for guessing, redevelop this site into luxury flats. This led to a large campaign to save the Good Samaritan though, and thankfully it would seem the plan has been shelved. Having been built deep beneath the water of West India Quay's North Dock, Canary Wharf Station is one of the most impressive stations on the entire Elizabeth line. Up above it's topped by a tall, 250 metre long structure which is perched in the middle of the dock like an artificial island. Named Crossrail Place, this mixed-use complex was inspired by the area's maritime heritage, and as such has an abstract, ship-like feel, including a wooden lattice roof, which was the largest timber project in the UK when built, and beneath which you'll find this amazing roof garden. Opened well ahead of the Elizabeth line in 2015, the Canary Wharf roof garden is packed with thousands of exotic plants, many of which first arrived in Britain via the West India docks in centuries past. Down below, the Canary Wharf station has quickly become famous for its bright canary yellow escalators, which really do stand out on a line defined by purple, black and white. Equally colourful is the Adams Plaza Bridge, which links Crossrail Place to Canada Square. As you can see, it's a bit like walking through a kaleidoscope. As you might imagine, the ultra-modern Canary Wharf business district is served by a collection of equally sleek and modern bars. If you're prepared for a bit of a walk though, you'll find one of the city's most historic pubs located about 15 minutes away from the station, on the road known as Cold Harbour, which runs alongside the Thames. The pub in question is called The Gun, and it first opened its doors way back in 1722. Over the next 50 years, it would seem the owners struggled to come up with a name they liked. At first it was known as the King and Queen, then the Rose and Crown, followed by the Ramsgate Pink, which I quite like, before finally settling on the Gun in 1771. When he wasn't away slugging it out at sea, the pub was a favourite haunt of Lord Horatio Nelson, who owned a house nearby, and would often visit the Gun on his regular trips to inspect the Navy's firepower. It'll perhaps come as no surprise then to hear that it's rumoured Lord Nelson often used an upstairs room in the Gun to entertain his mistress, Lady Emma Hamilton. Like other pubs we've seen on this channel, such as the Mayflower and the Prospect of Whitby, the Gun offers an excellent place to view the Thames, which is particularly glorious on a clear summer's day. After leaving Canary Wharf, the Elizabeth line passes beneath the River Lee before briefly emerging above ground to serve Custom House Station. The railways have a long history in this area, the first Custom House Station having been opened by the Eastern Counties and Thames Junction Railway way back in 1855. At first glance, the Elizabeth line's Custom House Station looks relatively simple. Its design and construction, however, were in fact a highly complicated process, as it was required to squeeze between Victoria Dock Road, the Docklands Light Railway, and the long menacing line of electricity pylons. Very handily, the station is also adjacent to the XL Exhibition Centre, and being above ground, Custom House offers a good spot to watch the Class 345 trains rumble below. Although as you can see, it was a little wet when I attempted this. Custom House Station is also home to a section of the Newham trackside wall, a mural by the artist Sonia Boyce, which, at some 2 kilometres long, is one of Britain's longest public artworks. In days gone by, this part of East London, with its docks and industry, would have been absolutely packed with pubs, most of which are now sadly lost. Thankfully, an excellent example of one of these old school backstreet boozers can still be found around here. It's on Shirley Street, which is a bit of a walk from Custom House Station. If you want to save your legs, Canning Town Tube Station is a lot closer. This pub has a pretty quirky name. It's called Streeties. Before that, it had a more traditional name. When it opened in 1872, it was known as the Prince Alfred. Streeties is a real locals pub. It's lively, very friendly, and for London, incredibly cheap. A pint of beer here costs almost half of what you'd pay elsewhere. In short, it's brilliant, and to make things even better, they even have a lovely little resident dog. Woolwich Station is located in the heart of the former Woolwich Arsenal, the vast walled-off district which once contained factories for churning out guns and explosives, an academy for training military personnel, and large ranges for test-firing munitions. So huge was the Woolwich Arsenal in fact, it was served by its own railway. I covered this fascinating system some time ago in one of my earliest videos, a look at London's quirkiest trains, which I'll link below. The Elizabeth Line's station at Woolwich makes considerable references to the area's history. Down below, for example, the red and blue tiling featured on these hefty pillars are a nod to the colours of the Corps of Royal Engineers, who were established in Woolwich. Up above, on the outside of the station building, you can see this artwork, which replicates the imagery featured on what was known as the Next of Kin Memorial Plaque. These were medallions which were given to the families who'd lost loved ones during World War I, and the mementos had 3 grim nicknames: the Dead Man's Penny, the Widow's Penny, and the Death Plaque. Most of these sombre keepsakes were manufactured right here in Woolwich. The bronze cladding around the station's entrance, meanwhile, contains a pattern which emulates the interior of a rifle barrel. Just moments away from the station stands the Dial Arch, a lovely modern pub which is housed within an 18th century armoury. The Dial Arch, after which the pub is named, and which stands guard at the entrance, was erected in 1720. If you look up there, you'll see the pillars are stacked with piles of shot. In the middle is the dial itself, a sundial which was used to regulate working hours. In 1886, this structure lent its name to a newly formed football team which had been assembled by a group of engineers who worked here. This squad went by a variety of names, first calling themselves the Dial Square Football Team, followed by Royal Arsenal, then Woolwich Arsenal. In 1913 they moved north of the river and settled for plain old Arsenal FC. You may have heard of them.
Abbey Wood, where this train terminates.
And so we finally arrive at our final station for today, and the end of this branch of the Elizabeth line. Like Custom House, Abbey Wood is above ground, and is therefore a good place to view the trains, as opposed to the underground sections of the line where platform doors obscure the view. Abbey Wood has a long history. The station here was first opened by the South Eastern Railway on the 30th of July 1849, in what was pretty much then open countryside. The most famous commuter to use Abbey Wood was the artist and textile designer William Morris, who lived a couple of miles away at the Red House in Bexley Heath. In the 1860s, he liked to travel in style, and so when going to and from the station, he did so in a lavishly decorated wagon. In order to accommodate the Elizabeth line, Abbey Wood Station has undergone a major rebuild. Most notable is the wonderful ceiling in the ticket hall, which is constructed from larch wood. a reference to the ancient woodlands which were located nearby. If you're still keeping up, our final pub today is the Abbey Arms, which is right next door to Abbey Station. As you can see, its exterior is decorated in splendid green tiling, all of which is original. This pub is one of the oldest buildings in the area, and was already located here when the station opened in the late 1840s. For many years, the Abbey Arms stood on the absolute edge of London, as the border with Kent ran along the middle of the road. Just a few moments along the road, and on the Kent side, stood another pub named the Harrow Inn, which, although now sadly lost, is still referred to in the road name Harrow Manor Way. In days gone by, Kent had different licensing hours, with pubs in the county required to stop serving at 10:30 PM. Under London's jurisdiction, however, the closing time was 11 PM, and so at 10:30 every evening there was a regular exodus of drinkers from the Harrow Inn to the Abbey Arms, where, by simply crossing the road, they could gain an extra half hour of boozing. Although I think we've had enough for today. Thank you so much for watching. I really do hope you've enjoyed this Elizabeth Line pub crawl. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the Elizabeth Line. Have you ridden it yet? And do you have a favourite station? And what about the pubs? Have you visited any of them? If so, please do let me know in the comments. You may be interested to know that, to celebrate the opening of the Elizabeth Line, I've designed a special mug, which features an illustration of the Class 345 train, along with a listing of every single station served. These are available from my online store, robsonlinedesigns, which I'll provide a link to below. As ever, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all of you who've left kind comments recently, and there have been a lot of them. I'm truly blessed to have the audience I do. I'd also like to extend a very warm welcome to all new subscribers. It's great to have you here. As mentioned earlier, if you've not yet subscribed to Rob's London, it'd be wonderful if you could please consider doing so, as this, along with clicking the bell icon, will ensure you don't miss out on any future videos. Finally, if you're feeling generous, I have a Ko-fi account which I'll link below. Any tips received are of course very much appreciated, and they really do help fund my work. On that note, thanks again for watching friends. Stay well, and please be sure to stay tuned.